Earlier, we discussed the weights aboard the International Space Station, and that 1,177 pounds of that is an unpressurized part of the payload. And a big chunk of that weight is the International Docking Adapter 3, which is identical to the second one, which was installed in 2016. You can see the locations here. And International Docking Adapter 2 was used for SpaceX during their uncrewed flight test earlier this year. Those are the physical connections that spacecraft like SpaceX's Crew Dragon and Boeing's CST-100 Starliner will, and other future, yet to be designed international spacecraft will use to attach to the International Space Station. Those international docking adapters, which are assembled at Kennedy Space Center, when it is installed, IDA 3 will provide two common ports, which enables opportunities for those visiting vehicles. Future spacecraft which use the International Docking Adapter will communicate with sensors within the IDA through the use of navigation systems and onboard computers, which means no crew assistance will be necessary, and it's much faster than the grapple and berthing process which we are watching today. Once Dragon arrives to the International Space Station, flight controllers on the ground will use the station's Canadarm2, which is where your view is coming from right now, to remove the International Docking Adapter 3 from Dragon's trunk, that unpressurized payload, and place it over Pressurized Mating Adapter 3 on the station's Harmony module, which may sound familiar because that's where Dragon is going this morning. It'll just be on the opposite side. So while Dragon is facing Earth, the Pressurized Mating Adapter 3 and International Docking Adapter 3 will be on the space-facing side. Later in the year, 2 Expedition 60 crew members will perform a spacewalk to permanently install the International Docking Adapter 3. Throughout the morning, we will also be accepting your questions. So if you're on Twitter, you can use the hashtag AskNASA and let us know what you want to know about today's process. Mika has a question and wants to know if the astronauts on board the International Space Station watched the launch of Dragon. Astronauts aboard the space station do have the opportunity to watch Dragon. A feed is sent up to them, and they can begin preparing for the arrival of the spacecraft. As a matter of fact, they've been doing so over the past few weeks. They've been rehearsing procedures and practicing for the arrival and how they will use the Canadarm2, which you can kind of see there at the bottom of the screen inside the robotics workstation display. And they will use that to reach out and grapple the spacecraft. It's currently still at that 30-meter hold point. Teams are conducting their final checks, waiting on good lighting conditions, and eventually Dragon will move to about 10 meters away from the space station. There's another special piece of equipment on board Dragon today, and that is a zip tie cutter designed by a Micro G Next team. Micro G Neutral Buoyancy Experiment Design Teams is a program that challenges undergraduate students to design, build, and test a tool or device that helps us address an authentic current space exploration challenge. And you can see the team there, the CERO team, which stands for Cutting, Extraction, and Retention Operations. They designed a zip tie cutter. It cuts and retains the zip tie. Astronauts have to be careful with sharp objects in space when on spacewalks to help protect their spacesuits, and so this zip tie cutter, which was used by Chris Cassidy in a demonstration, will also be used on the International Docking Adapter spacewalk later this year. This is the first Micro G Next tool to be used in space. And it will actually, rather than the IDA-3 spacewalk, it will be used on the upcoming alpha magnetic spectrometer spacewalks. Students did all of the design and building of that tool, and the upcoming challenges will be announced mid-August. You can visit microgravityuniversity.jsc.nasa.gov for more information. Teams on the ground reporting we have about 4 minutes left of the 30-meter hold of Dragon before it's given the green light and begins to move up to the capture position of about 10 to 12 meters away. You can see those blinking lights at the top of your screen. That's Dragon, and it will be scheduled to depart the 30-meter hold point very soon. The International Space Station, currently flying 255 statute miles over the Pacific Ocean near Hawaii.
Station Houston, Space Ground 2, Dragon is ready to proceed to the capture point. Expect approach to resume in about 30 seconds.
Station copies.
Dragon is now departing the 30-meter hold point.
Approach from 30 meters. Monitor per step 5 and 1.102.
Copy and work.
This ascension from the hold point at 30 meters to the capture point of 10 to 12 meters takes about 15 minutes. The movements here are very deliberate, as required when near the space station to ensure a safe approach. To step back through some of the milestones Dragon has already reached this morning, earlier today, it came upon the approach ellipsoid. That's the 1 kilometer line around the space station when joint operations began between the two teams, SpaceX and NASA. Then had a hold point at 250 meters while teams checked out all of the systems, and then crossed the keep out sphere at 200 meters away. We have just departed that 30-meter hold point, the final hold point, and it is now on its way to the 10 to 12 meters distance from the space station when capture can occur using the Canadarm2.
Station on 2, we see the prior range decreasing. For corridor monitoring, the circle is within the corridor. outline size to vehicle size is not able to be determined. In P1 lower outboard, the light is offset from the circle slightly starboard. The circle is offset from the center, half a vehicle width starboard, a third of vehicle length forward. In S1 lower outboard, all the same except the light is offset from the circle, half a width starboard.
We copy, and that's a good report.
That was a voice of NASA astronaut Christina Cook, who is in the cupola module at the robotics workstation, relaying her view of Dragon as it approaches the International Space Station. That leads us into our next Ask NASA question, asking who is maneuvering the Canadarm. Is that the crew or is it mission control? The current robotic arm operator, the Prime, is Nick Hague today, NASA astronaut, being backed up by NASA's Christina Cook. It's kind of a two-part process. The capture of Dragon through the Canadarm2 is commanded by the crew, Nick and Christina, as we mentioned, and afterward it'll be controls of the Canadarm2 will be turned over to the robotics controller here on the ground, who will then reposition Dragon and berth it to the space station's Harmony module. Our next Ask NASA question from Margaret. She wants to know if Dragon will be unloaded all at once or only as supplies are needed. The crew members have specific time on their timelines each day to unload Dragon. Some content is unloaded earlier than others, things like science investigations and other time-sensitive cargo. We also mentioned the International Docking Adapter 3, and that's part of the unpressurized payload, which will be unloaded by teams on the ground. Dragon will stay attached until August 27th, and throughout that time, teams aboard the space station will unload the cargo in Dragon before repacking it with science and other items for a safe splashdown. Dragon is currently the only cargo capsule that can return payloads to Earth for us, as it does not burn up in the atmosphere. Instead, it splashes down in the Pacific Ocean and is recovered, and those science samples are delivered to the teams who are studying them. Teams on the ground are currently estimating about an 8:15 a.m. Central Time capture of Dragon this morning. We were initially looking at a 9 a.m. Central Time capture, but Dragon was ready and so were our teams, so things have been moving quickly, as Dragon is now about 22 meters away from the space station and continues to move toward that capture point of 10 to 12 meters away.
Band.
Mission copies.
And we will, of course, let you know when that will be lifted.
Dragon now only 20 meters away from the space station, so only about 10 meters to go until it reaches that capture point, moving slowly and deliberately.
It is unchanged, except that in the P1 lower outboard, we are now converging. So we have only slightly starboard for the light offset from the circle, and the circle is offset from the center about a quarter width starboard and a quarter length forward. In S1 lower outboard, the light is offset from the circle a third of a width port. I may have said starboard last time. It was port last time. And those are our changes.
Copy all. Good report.
That was NASA's Christina Cook reporting what she sees from the robotics workstation in the cupola. Teams here on the ground reporting we're about 7 minutes away from arrival to the capture point of 10 to 12 meters from the space station. They're currently conducting a go, no-go poll for capture. Everything's still moving along smoothly. Dragon now coming up on about 16 meters away from the International Space Station, moving toward its capture point of 10 to 12 meters. You can see Dragon getting closer, and this is a view down the Canadarm2. You can see that grapple fixture in the middle of the spacecraft. That's what NASA astronaut Nick Hague will be aiming for as he drives in the Canadarm2 to grasp or grapple it and attach it to the robotic arm. Dragon is continuing to move slowly toward its capture point of about 10 to 12 meters away when that driving of the robotic arm will begin to take place.
Houston Station on 2 with Block Bravo.
Go ahead.
SMP1 lower outboard. The light is inside the corridor. The outline matches the vehicle size. The light is not offset from the circle, and the circle is not offset from the center. In S1 lower outboard, the light is still slightly offset from the circle to the port.
We copy. That's a good report.
That report from NASA's Christina Cook, who is working with Nick Hague inside the cupola module, preparing to grapple the spacecraft once it arrives at the grapple point. You can see as SpaceX gets closer, the two small International Space Station emblems below the P on the word SpaceX, and those are the markings to show that it has visited station twice before. Dragon now about 11 meters away, so very close to that hold point.
Station Houston, space to ground 2, confirm capture point hold per step 6 in 1.102.
Copy.
Ground teams confirming that Dragon is now in the proper position to be captured by the station's robotic arm.
Station, we are showing that we are within the constraint for sunrise within 15 minutes and that we are currently a no-go for capture. We plan to wait until sunrise, and a few minutes after, we'll let you know if we're ready for capture.
We copy and concur.
As you just heard Christina Cook mention, as the International Space Station is flying over the South Pacific Ocean, they will be coming up on sunrise shortly.
Station, we confirm capture conditions.
Houston copies.
Crew members are holding until the lighting conditions are specific and improved so they can properly grapple the spacecraft. You can see Dragon beginning to look brighter as the space station is heading over towards the south of South Africa. Team's still conducting their go and no-go polls here to make sure everything is fit and ready for Dragon to be captured by the Canadarm2, which you can see at the bottom of your screen. Once NASA's Nick Hague begins driving the Canadarm2 in towards Dragon, you can see that grapple fixture right in the middle of the spacecraft. That's what he'll be aiming for.
Space to ground 2, we are go for capture sequence. Perform step 4 and 1.110 Dragon capture. Begin monitoring the back-away cue card.
Station copies.
Dragon and the robotic arm still holding as the crew continues stepping through their procedures, and soon we'll start to see the arm get closer to the Dragon capsule and that capture point. And as our satellites hand over, we do not have video of Dragon, but the crew is still on it, and we will regain videos shortly. Everything's still running ahead of schedule here in Mission Control. As we mentioned, we were looking at a capture time of about 9 a.m. Central this morning, but moving much faster, as Dragon is now at the capture point and being readied for capture by the crew on board. Canadarm2 is now in motion. As we gain video back, you'll see it start to slowly move in toward that capture point on SpaceX's Dragon. The arm 9 meters away. Arm continuing to move in, only 4 meters away. Three meters away. Dragon is now in free drift and ready for capture. The robotic arm only 2 meters away. One meter from capture. Dragon is over the pin. And Dragon is captured. That's 8:11 a.m. Central Time over the coast of southern Chile. At the time of capture, 8:11 a.m. Central Time, the station was flying 267 miles over Chile in South America. The arm is currently securing Dragon. And capture is complete.
Houston Station, capture complete. Your go for post-capture reconfiguration.
Congratulations on a beautiful capture. We're looking forward to using the new capabilities and research that Dragon has brought you.
Thanks, Travis. I want to congratulate the team spread across the globe that makes delivering a vehicle like this, it's pretty looking at it out the window, delivering it to the station full of science and cargo and things to keep us busy. So the mission continues.
Good words.
And the mission continues, as you heard from NASA's Nick Hague, who just captured the Dragon using the Canadarm2. Dragon's journey to the International Space Station began on Thursday, July 25th, and it arrived this morning, capture occurring at 8:11 a.m. Central Time. The station was flying 267 statute miles over southern Chile. You watched as NASA's Nick Hague, backed up by Christina Cook, took their place in the cupola module, allowing them a great view of Dragon and the Canadarm2, which they drove to capture the vehicle as it was about 11 meters from the International Space Station. The crew is now going to begin turning the controls back over to the teams here on the ground. The robotic controller here in Houston is going to reposition the vehicle and prepare it for berthing to the Harmony module. As the teams on the ground begin to prepare Dragon for berthing, we're going to take a break as some of that occurs and continue our coverage beginning at 10 a.m. Central Time for the SpaceX Dragon's berthing to the International Space Station. We'll continue answering social media questions once we get back on air, so keep sending those in with the hashtag AskNASA. But in the meantime, that concludes our coverage of the capture of SpaceX's Dragon, completed at 11 a.m. Central Time over southern Chile. Join us again for live berthing coverage at 10 a.m. Central. We're signing off for now. This is Mission Control Houston.
Hey, you're watching NASA TV, on the air and online every day, on this planet and beyond.
We I believe that this nation should commit itself.
Extraordinary television picture here.
50 years ago, two Americans set foot on another world for the first time in human history.
Hi, Roger. You're loud and clear.
It was July of 1969, and the whole world was watching.
Step off the limb now.
As Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin stepped out of the lunar module and ushered in a new age of exploration.
Okay, now I think I'll do the same.
Not only was the moon landing itself an extraordinary feat, and the science performed unparalleled in human history, but the samples our astronauts collected would change our understanding of Earth's nearest celestial neighbor for decades to come. On July 24th, after traveling over 950,000 miles in a little more than 8 days, the Apollo 11 crew began to re-enter our planet's atmosphere, beginning the final stage of their dangerous journey home. Their parachutes deployed and our astronauts safely splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, where the USS Hornet aircraft carrier was awaiting our new heroes. With navigational precision, our U.S. Navy quickly lifted them up into a helicopter and delivered them safely to the deck of the USS Hornet, where the astronauts entered into quarantine as a new era of lunar science began. 50 years later, we come to you live from that same U.S. Navy aircraft carrier.
Welcome to NASA Science Live, where we're coming to you aboard the USS Hornet, a Navy aircraft carrier, now a museum here in Alameda, California. This ship has an unprecedented history. It helped lead the victory in the Pacific in World War II, and this is the ship that brought back to shore the actual Apollo 11 capsule crew and the first ever samples from another world here back to Earth. I'm your host, Dwayne Brown, and we are celebrating as a nation the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 lunar landing. You're going to hear a lot more, get the behind-the-scenes look as only NASA Science Live can bring you, and interact with our guests here on Facebook, Twitter, and send in those questions using hashtag AskNASA. And if you're watching online, use the comment box for your questions. Behind me is a crane, very unique, just like the USS Hornet. It actually hoisted out of the ocean the Apollo 11 capsule. You're going to hear about that. You're going to hear about the ship. You're going to hear about the science from the lunar samples, the challenges of taking humans to the moon and getting them back. And we have a crew member, yes, a crew member, who was stationed aboard the USS Hornet at the time of the recovery operations. It is going to be magnificent. And you might want to look out for some items that you never knew about in Apollo 11. So welcome aboard. Let's learn more about this incredible ship, the USS Hornet, from a USS Hornet tour guide, Cindy Savoy. Over to you, Cindy.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Cindy Savoy. I'm a docent here on the USS Hornet Sea, Air, and Space Museum, and welcome. We have the largest Apollo exhibit outside the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., and President Nixon chose us to be the recovery ship for the Apollo 11 astronauts, the first men to walk on the moon, because we were decorated and we're famous. Historically, we are kept in our authenticity, so we remind you exactly what it was like in 1969. Here I'm standing in a replica of a living room, the way it looked in July of 1969, with a TV that we had to get up and turn the channel, and a shared carpet. We also have a picture of President Nixon, and he was very proud of us, and that's why he was the only president to come to the Hornet or to a carrier to represent the United States and welcome back astronauts when they came back from the moon. So I would like to point out some artifacts that we have here that we will go over later on in the program. We have the MQF, Mobile Quarantine Facility, where the astronauts were placed after they came back from the moon. We have a famous helicopter, number 66, and this helicopter was also in the movie Apollo 11 with Tom Hanks. And then over here we have the the Apollo capsule and a Gemini capsule, and we will point those out later on in the program. So welcome to the USS Hornet Sea, Air, and Space Museum, and we will see you soon. And back to you, Dwayne.
Well, thanks, Cindy. And we'll be coming back to you a lot more to hear about these artifacts on this incredible ship, the USS Hornet. So this is the NASA Science Live set here on the Hornet, and I'm joined by NASA's top scientists, or officially known NASA Chief Scientist Jim Green. Welcome aboard the USS Hornet, sir.
Man, is this fantastic. Beautiful aircraft carrier.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It is.
The NASA chief scientist has a unique role. Explain.
Well, I'm the independent advisor to the administrator on science activities. So that allows me to review our programs, which I'm really excited about, but also tell him about some of the exciting new discoveries that we make almost every day.
Right. This looks like the moon, so let's get to the point, Jim.
All right.
Out of all the discoveries made during the Apollo program, what was one of the biggest?
All right, I'll tell you what one of my favorite one was. So here we have the Apollo 11 site right here. The landing site is in Mare Tranquillitatis. This is also called Tranquility Base, and as you can see, it's between these dark area that we call Mare and the lighter crust. Now, what they brought back was about 50 pounds of lunar material, beautiful sets of rocks and regolith and all sorts of things like that. And one of them was a real find. It was an anorthosite. Now, yes?
What? Sounds like a rock band.
Yeah,
okay,
I
think you need to explain that one.
Anorthosite. This is a particular rock that loves to float on top of lava. This was very important because it helped us distinguish various theories on how the moon was created. You know, a couple of the theories are, well, we captured it. Another one of the theories is the Earth was spinning so fast it just lobbed off a chunk. But the one that we really wanted to look at was what's called the giant impact hypothesis. So let me take you back 4.6 billion years. The Earth was being created, a proto-Earth, if you will, but another object in the area called Theia, about Mars size. The two attracted. Theia hammered the Earth, but was blown apart. What happens next is the remaining material of Theia comes together. So if you can imagine molten rock all over the place coming together to form a new object, on the surface, it's a complete molten rock area. We call that the lunar magma ocean. And what floats on that is the anorthosite. So by that one piece of anorthosite that we brought back from Apollo 11, it really helped distinguish the theories. The giant impact hypothesis is the one, even today, we believe, created the moon.
So does that mean the moon is Earth's little brother, or?
Yes. In fact, the more we look at material from the moon, the more we see it's so much Earth-like.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're talking Apollo 11. We're going to talk that, and then we're going to go into the future. There's an interesting story about the rocks when they came aboard the aircraft carrier. They dealt with some little crawly things. I think.
You know, I tell you, we did not know much about our nearest neighbor, all right? And so we have to be very careful. Bringing material back from space may have pathogens, you know, those things that would affect our life, and so we had to be very careful about that. So we then had a series of processes to determine that the astronauts, when they came back, were safe to reintroduce into our population and didn't have pathogens with them that they brought back from the moon. So the first thing, if you can imagine, there's the capsule floating in the water, and the scuba divers come up. They throw into, if they open the hatch a little bit, throw into the capsule 3 suits, and these are called the biological isolation garments.
Big for short, right?
The BIGs, that's right.
Always an acronym in
Always
NASA.
an acronym,
Always,
right.
Okay.
So they put these BIGs on, okay? Now that was supposed to then keep them isolated, okay, from what was going to happen next. So they then took them out of the capsule, you know, brought them up. There's 66 right there, 66, that beautiful helicopter, one at a time, and then brought them back to the carrier, brought the little Hornet, landed on the deck. From there, they then moved into the mobile quarantine facility, you know, which is an Airstream trailer, and then locked it up, all right? So now they're really isolated. What happens next is we then have access to the lunar rocks, and in a controlled environment, we add mice, okay?
Mice?
Yes, we added mice, and we wanted to see if there were pathogens in those rocks, okay, and whether the mice would survive or not, and of course they did. And that enabled us to realize that there's no pathogens for us to worry about on the moon.
Sort of like a canary in a coal mine.
Yes, exactly. That's a perfect analogy. And so once that happened and the canary kept chirping, we opened the door and let them out.
What do we do with the mice?
I don't know what happened to the mice,
Okay.
but
they served their purpose.
They served their purpose.
Fantastic. Okay, welcome again to NASA Science Live, where we're from the USS Hornet. Send in your questions to #AskNASA, and we have some. We're going to take some, Jim.
Sounds good.
First up from Pierre on Twitter asks, is the moon considered another world?
Very good question. You know, the moon is a significant body in size, all right? It in many ways is almost planetary scale. And in fact, if it orbited the sun, we'd call it a planet. Mm-hmm. You know, that's how that goes. So yes, I would say the moon is really not only another world, but planet size.
Another question from Barack on Twitter asks, what did the astronauts see on the moon?
Well, Buzz described it, I think, very well. They're the beautiful pictures that we brought back, and he called it magnificent desolence. You know, it was eerie. It was, you know, had gray tones. It just was another world. And contrast that with when they saw the Earth. You know, the beautiful blue, you know, marble, as we call it, with oceans and clouds above them. It was quite the contrast.
Another question on Twitter from BK Hennig asks, what was special on the rocks we got from the moon?
Well, actually, we really have been teasing them out. We don't analyze all the rocks. From all 6 Apollos, we brought back about 840 pounds of rock material. 25% of that we've kept aside. All right, we haven't interrogated them. And that is because we want to look at the rocks that we have. We want to be able to analyze them, learn new things so that we then can use the additional samples. Plus, the laboratory equipment is getting so good. We can take CT scans. We can look inside. We can see what are called isotopes. We can figure out the mineralogy and how these atoms are aligned in matrices to make up different rock material. And what we find is that the moon is mostly Earth-like.
Wow, mostly Earth-like. Okay, keep sending in your questions here at #AskNASA. We're now going to go back to Cindy, where she is next to the test capsule that was used by the USS Hornet and the mission team to make sure that they were ready for the recovery operations for the real thing. Over to you, Cindy.
Hi, welcome back. I want to introduce you to our Apollo capsule. If you look inside, you can see how tight it was for 3 men to be in there for approximately 7 days. Now, it's very tight. They had on spacesuits. They were limited mobility in there, except Michael Collins was very lucky because he was orbiting the moon for 22 hours while Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were on the lunar surface. So he had room to spread out and relax, and he didn't have to talk to anybody. He absolutely loved it. If you look inside, there are some spaces that are vacant, but down there, you would probably have a lot of equipment and supplies throughout the whole unit. But this capsule actually was very important. It's the exact replica of the one that went to the moon, but this went to space to test the heat shield and also the instruments inside, but it was unmanned. Once it came back from the Earth, it wanted to see if it would actually tolerate a hard landing. We actually launch from over the ocean and we land in the ocean for soft landings, and we'll show you why. Let's walk around and look and see why a hard landing has severe implications. If you look at this, they dropped it from a high tower and it landed on a hard surface, and this was the impact that happened. You come around to the rear, you come around all the way to the rear of the capsule, and look at this, it actually cracked the structure. And you see the cracks and holes in it. So this would not have really survived hard landings, and they actually donated it to us, so it's on loan for us to enjoy, and so that our public can see it, and it's good for education purposes. You can see the heat shield has been replaced, but this is demonstrate how the heat shield is built. Actually, all the wiring that is throughout the capsules for electricity, for communication, and for scientific research, to gather scientific research. So if you look, we're going to come back here to the front. And hi, Dwayne. How are you?
How are you, Cindy?
I'm fine. How are you?
We're keeping you busy today.
Yes.
An honor to be here, and thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so you talked to thousands, millions of folks about this incredible facility and the history. What is one of the more common questions you get about the capsule?
Well, actually, because there was 3 men in there for 7 days, a lot of the kids want to know what was the environment like when they came back from the moon, the smell. So I asked them, I said, now you've been in there for 7 days. You left, you came back what you left with. Did you take a shower for 7 days? And the kids go, oh, no. They said, yeah. It's very, very rememberable.
I can only imagine, but we won't go on graphic details on that. One more question. Obviously, when we talk about space travel, there's a lot of math involved.
Yes.
Now, they didn't have computers back then and doing Apollo.
Right.
It reminds me of the movie Hidden Figures, right?
Yes.
A little more detail on that.
Well, what they did was they used slide rule for calculations. They used the sextant for navigational fixes. For celestial fixes, they used the sextant, and also they had the communication system was not as sophisticated, so they practiced a lot in communicating with Houston and back and forth, and a lot of it had to do with how they were going to tolerate landing in the ocean. So when they did land in the capsule in the ocean, they were basically upside down, and the ocean was moving quite a bit. So when the astronauts came out and they had on their big suits, they had to be very mobile, and they had to be quickly transferred from the capsule to the Hornet.
These are the biological isolation garments.
Yes, the big suits, right. And so they had to be transferred and quickly removed from the capsule into the helicopter to the Hornet, and then they went into the mobile quarantine facility, which we will talk about at another time.
I'm looking forward to it, and we'll see you later in the show.
Yes, thank you, Dwayne.
Absolutely. Now we're going to talk about technology, because technology is very important, and we're talking about a technology that if it doesn't work, we're going to have a bad day. I'm now joined by Jeremy Vander Kam.
Yes, sir.
Love the name. It's very cool. What's your title and what do you do?
So I'm the Deputy Manager for the Orion Thermal Protection System, or TPS. And that material is what goes around the outside of the vehicle to protect it from the heating during reentry.
Okay. So, the heat shield, very important. Why do we need the heat shield? But better yet, how do you design it to make sure it works?
Right. So we have two major types of heat shields that we create depending on the mission being flown. And really the most important factor there is how fast you're going when you get to your destination. The first type of heat shield material we use is an insulator. This is a tile material that's been used on the space shuttle and that we use some on Orion. It's made of silica fibers. And for these materials, they'll look about the way they did when they launched, when they come back, where their surfaces can reach temperatures between 2,000 and 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, but the part that's attached to the vehicle will stay a nice, comfortable 100 degrees Fahrenheit or so. For more aggressive missions, like what the Apollo missions were doing, and like what we're doing on the Orion capsule as part of the Artemis program, we're coming back from the moon. Now we're going like 11 kilometers per second. We have to use material systems that are ablative. This is one of the, this sample here was actually taken from the first Orion flight test in 2014. The way these work is that their surface temperatures may be between 4,000 and 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That energy actually reacts with the material and consumes the material, and that consumes energy itself. So we can tolerate much higher temperatures and keep the part that's bonded to the vehicle, again, a nice, comfortable, say 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Fantastic. So, okay, so you mentioned Orion, and we're going to talk about the Artemis program a little later in the show. Now, what is the difference between the Apollo material in the process versus Orion?
So there's some very, very close similarities. So the Apollo capsules used a material called Avcoat over their entire surface. And that's actually what this material here is. So for Orion, we use Avcoat on the base heat shield. And for our first flight test, we actually built it the same way that Apollo did. And it looked very much like this. It had a honeycomb structure, and it had our ablative material inserted into each cell of that honeycomb. Now, as we move forward into the Artemis program, we're using that same material, Avcoat, but we're building it in a different way, where there is no honeycomb structure. Instead, we're molding it into blocks that we can bond on, and that gives us a much more efficient manufacturing process. Also on Orion, we're using insulative materials on the cooler parts of the vehicle, again in tiles. that allow us to have a very efficient manufacturing process compared to what Apollo did.
Wow, that's fantastic. And this looks sort of like my coffee table at home, but I'm quite sure it's a lot more
It might be a little
advanced.
more expensive.
Yeah, and probably, you probably can't afford that. So we're going to go to #AskNASA, and we've got lots of questions coming in, and keep those questions coming in. So we have a question from Keith on Facebook. What was the material used for the outside of the Apollo capsule?
So that was the Avcoat material that we just
Avcoat.
discussed, yes.
Okay. And we have from Mark Wayne on Twitter asks, will this technology be used for everyday life here on Earth?
Our heat shield materials typically don't find their way into everyday life on Earth. They're created to do exactly one thing, and that's to be a heat shield material. So you won't see them around except in museums on spacecraft.
So working on a team that's so important, give us some sort of idea of how big a team would be for the Orion that we're talking about that. And is there anything that may keep the team up at night as we get close to launching?
Yeah, so we're between 40 and 50 people between our industry partners and the various NASA centers. We sleep pretty well at night. Our biggest challenge is that when we test these materials on the ground, we use a facility called an ArcJet down at NASA Ames Research Center. And in those facilities, we can only test samples that are between 4 and 8 inches in diameter, which is a lot smaller than a full-size spacecraft. So until we get our first big flight test doing the actual mission at full scale, which for us will be the Artemis 1 mission, there's that little bit of uncertainty left that we haven't quite gotten out of the way yet.
Okay, let me take another question from Kimberly on Twitter. Asks, what type of educational background do you need if you want to be a part of the future Artemis program and work on heat shield technology?
Well, across the program, anything in the STEM realm will work. For our heat shield team, we have a lot of material scientists, we have a lot of mechanical engineers, a lot of aerospace engineers, systems engineers as well.
How did you get involved in this? I mean, were you tinkering with things as a kid or building things? Or?
I don't know. I had an obsession with anything that flew since I think I was born. And yeah, just found my way into NASA and found my way into the Orion program when it started in 2006, actually.
Wow. And so when we look back at the Apollo, and this is the test capsule, did you like study manuals or talk to folks as you to build on Orion?
Yes, that was a big part of starting Orion. We went back into all of the history we could find. We were pulling file cabinets out of garages full of files and papers and reading everything we could get our hands on. We studied all the old vehicles in their museums to learn as much as we could about what they did and what we could bring forward.
So what's the next step now? And again, we're going to talk about the Artemis program later in the show, but Orion, explain Orion and the capsule and what's taking place now.
So right now we have flown one flight test in 2014. The Orion capsule that will fly the Artemis 1 mission is complete just last week, I believe. And that mission will launch in 2020, 2021. And we're actually already starting to build the Orion capsule that will be on the Artemis 2 mission further on, the first mission with crew on board.
This is really cool. So Jeremy, thank you a lot again. So now we're going to go back to Cindy. And again, you're watching NASA Science Live aboard the USS Hornet. Send in your questions to #AskNASA. Cindy is now next to the helicopter, and the helicopter has a unique story. In fact, this helicopter was in the movie Apollo 13. Cindy.
Hi, welcome back. And we're in front of our Apollo number 66 helicopter, which was in Apollo 13 with Tom Hanks. The original one no longer exists, and our aircraft restoration crew saw this in Tucson's boneyard and said, is that 148999, what actually did fly off of the Hornet during the 1960s? They brought it back here to the Hornet and restored it to the mint condition that it's in right now. So let's take a look at it. This helicopter is so important because it's built in such a way that you wanted to have a lot of room in there, because when the astronauts were actually picked up out of the flotation device, they had to come in here and they were told, all the crew was told, do not touch them, don't go near them, because they could have some contaminants on them, even though they had already put the anti-contamination fluid or solution on their big suits, bioinsulation garments. It was about 40 feet from pickup from the flotation device into the Hornet, into the basket to bring back to the Hornet. Once they were able to come back, they were on the flight deck. The whole unit descended here to the Apollo surface, and then they went in with their masks. They had special respirator mask on, and they were transferred immediately into the MQF, where we will talk about at a later time. This unit actually is so famous because it's so built in such a way that there's so much room that the exact model is also used for Marine One, which the President of the United States uses. Also, you can look at the way the landing gear is. If for some reason it has to land on a soft surface, which is the ocean, the landing gear retracts and you have some floating devices in here. This is a very unique one. We're very proud of our air restoration crew for what they did to bring it here so you could enjoy it. And it's historic because of the movie and just the way that it operates with the jet engine up there on top and the big rotors for maneuverability. So welcome back, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Cindy.
Back to you, Dwayne.
Thanks, Cindy. We're back here on the set at NASA Science Live, and I'm joined by another scientist, Kimberly Anico. Welcome.
Thanks, Dwayne.
You do a lot. Tell us, you're involved with a whole bunch of cool things.
Well, I'm a research scientist at NASA Ames Research Center in California, Silicon Valley. Our center does innovative approaches to open questions in aeronautics and basic fundamental space research, and have been working there for a number of years, and I work on lots of different mission concepts. I'm trained as an astrophysicist, so I've built instruments that have flown in space and in the air. I actually had built a payload that crashed into the moon and found water on the moon, and I have been doing science management through the New Horizons Pluto flyby, and most recently on our flying telescope, SOFIA. So as a scientist at NASA, I'm interested and attracted to these questions that drive us to push ourselves to new limits and opening up creative solutions, and it's a fun job.
Wow, that's a pretty cool shopping list, and you even come dressed for the part. You know, you got the moon. You gotta. That is awesome.
Well, Dwayne, where's your Mars tie?
Oh, I forgot. I'm sorry.
This is inspired. It's a conversation starter in a sense. I mean, the whole opportunity to speak about space and science and exploration and discovery and making the impossible possible is inspired by Apollo 8, where Bill Anders took the first picture of the Earth from lunar orbit. So our first humans who looked back on our home world for the first time.
Wow. Okay, let's talk science during Apollo. And you have some interesting things here. This looks like Earth, but I'm pretty sure it's not, right?
Yes. So earlier in the show, you and Jim were showing a grayish globe, which was the moon. This is still the moon, but it's actually a map of the height of the moon. And this is post-Apollo, and this is when we had a series of robotic explorers doing orbits around the moon. One in particular, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, and one of their instruments measured topography, how high something is. Blue represents low areas, so what was known as the mare are low areas, and red on this globe shows high areas. And I'll turn it around to show the far side that we don't see, and the far side is exotic. Did you know that the average height on the far side is over a mile higher than on the near side? And it has the most extreme topography because the highest point on the moon is higher than the highest point on Earth, Mount Everest. Also intriguing, on the far side down to the South Pole, it's one of the lowest areas, a giant impact basin called the South Pole Aitken Basin. And this is an exciting area that lunar scientists are salivating to have an opportunity to have access to this part of the moon that we haven't had before.
Wow. Now, this little guy is really interesting, and I'm willing to bet it doesn't look like it came from the beach or a little hill, right?
You're right, Dwayne, and you're looking at an Apollo moon rock. This is from Apollo 15, but the lunar rocks that came back from the 6 landed missions have transformed our understanding of how the moon formed, and also indications of what happened early on in our solar system. In addition to over the 6 landed mission, 840 pounds of rock, about 2,000 different samples, the Apollo astronauts put instruments on the surface of the moon. Apollo 11, they only had 2.5 hours on the surface. When we got to Apollo 17, we had about 3 days on the surface. Each different Apollo mission did more science. Buzz Aldrin, during Apollo 11, put out a seismometer. This would measure quakes, moonquakes on the moon. We also put these retroreflectors. Retroreflectors allowed us to measure the distance between the Earth and the moon, and also learn about measuring its orbital rotation and the spin of the Earth's rotational axis. We had a dust detector on Apollo 11, and also an interesting instrument to measure the particles coming off the sun, because the surface of the moon is a wonderful laboratory to do science from.
So all of those science experiments, and how many were there again on them?
Well, on Apollo 11 we had about 4, plus the photographs, the motion pictures, and the fact that the Armstrong and Armstrong's footprint is an experiment in itself. It showed about the properties of the lunar soil regolith and how it impacted upon pressure. And so you might hear Aldrin talk about, I only went about ½ an inch or something like that. That was telling the scientists, because up to then we had no idea what the surface of the moon would touch and feel like. So even them walking on the moon themselves provided information about the lunar surface.
Now I asked Jim there were so many findings, but what he thought was the biggest. What would be next in line?
Next in line? Well, it's, when you look at the moon, you see all these craters. But we didn't really know what the dominant mechanism is to make the surface of the moon. And the Apollo astronauts and the landed mission showed us it was impacts, things hitting the moon, rather than plate tectonics like we have here on Earth, or active volcanism that's reshaping our surface. So by that, and by the continuation, the moon has preserved an early history of our solar system that is forever lost on our planet. So we want to learn about the early Earth, we look to the moon. We want to learn about the early sun, we look to the moon. And those mysteries are still being teased out, and it's all done by the surface measurements on the moon and the samples we return from the moon.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to go to social media and #AskNASA. Keep those questions coming in if you're just joining us. This is NASA Science Live aboard the USS Hornet. We're talking Apollo in the past, and we're going to talk about future lunar exploration and beyond. Our first question is from Enrique, who asks, how much water is actually on the moon and why?
Oh, great question. In fact, we couldn't even have this conversation 10 years ago, because the concept of water on the moon is a relatively new discovery. And this is the beauty of science. We haven't figured everything out. About 10 years ago, several instruments, including a mission that I worked on, we discovered water on the moon. And then since then, we have water found in different arrangements on the moon, and in particular, the poles. The poles have special areas where the bottoms of craters have not seen light, and so they're very cold, colder than the surface of Pluto. And they have become cold traps where water is migrated. How much is there? Well, from the knowledge we have to date, it could be 100 to 200 million tons of water, but we still lack the detailed maps to know exactly how much we have. Right now, our knowledge of the moon is almost like we have the knowledge when you're planning a hike. You have a knowledge to drive your car to the trailhead. But if we need to go to walk to that waterfall or walk to that cliff, we need more detailed maps, especially about the water. Water is scientifically interesting, and it's also important for a sustainable human presence on the moon, because water can be oxygen we breathe, hydrogen and oxygen for fuel. It's a wonderful resource and an interesting scientific discovery that is only 10 years young.
Wow. Stephen asks, what happened to the instruments on the moon? Are they still on the surface?
Yes, they are. In fact, some of the instruments are still in use. Can you imagine 50 years later? Those retroreflectors I mentioned, these are glass mirrors or prisms that you can beam a laser beam from Earth, and it bounces right back to you. So if you measure the time it takes and you know the speed of light, you know the distance between the Earth and the moon. And over 50 years of measurements, we have measured that the moon is receding from us about 1.5 inches a year. Most of the instruments on the surface of the moon, they had to survive a 340-hour lunar night. It got really cold, and some of them didn't make it through. We had other instruments that lasted several months and weeks through the mid-70s. But to go back and put new instruments on is very exciting.
We're running out of time here, but I've got to get this question in because I think this is so important from Mary on Twitter who asked, what got you involved in science?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, I was a very curious child. I loved learning, and I'm really grateful for the education and the teachers who tolerated my many questions I had. But I was also empowered to realize that, you know, to asking, we have this short time on this planet and we're learning so much. I just became very curious, and the science career just fell into that because I just had a very open mind.
Yeah, your passion is infectious. So we're going to talk some more and get into the future later in the show. Now, what if I told you you could actually hear data? Now, work with me here. A group of musicians, and I appreciate this being a musician myself, have taken a tool and taken the song and put in the song 50 years of lunar science. It's called sonification. Let's hear more from Moon Data Visualizer, Ernie Wright.
The pitch of the melody is telling you the amount of data that was returned about the moon over time. There's a clock sound that tells you about the progress of the months. And there are symbols that go off to mark the times of launches. During the Apollo era, the pitch rises as we learn more and more about the moon and gather more data. And then there's this period in the middle where it kind of falls, when we weren't sending people and we weren't sending robotic missions. It falls off a little bit. Starts to rise again to a crescendo in the modern era. In the sonification, there are these two peaks in the valley, but the other thing to take from it is that there is a continuous note of exploration. You know, the sound doesn't really go away. The past and the present and the future are all connected. You get that sense when you're listening to it that while there are variations in our level of interest and in the amount of data that we're gathering at any particular time, there's also a continuity that once we went there, we didn't want to stop.
Now, sonification is available at NASA on the new podcast, on the new NASA Explorer series. You can also hear it on Google Cloud, SoundCloud, Google Play, I should say, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcasts. And this cool technology was developed in Toronto, Canada by a company called System Sound. Now on the set here is someone, and I'm very honored that he's here on the NASA Science Live set, Skip Howard Robertson, a crew member on the USS Hornet. Sir, welcome. It's an honor. Thank you for your service.
It was my pleasure and my honor.
Let's go back in time. Today, 50 years to today, would be the day before tomorrow, which is the actual anniversary that you guys picked up the spacecraft. So the day before, what's the atmosphere on board the USS Hornet?
It was an atmosphere of expectation, excitement, wondering what was going to happen, how is it all going to work out. Would I get to see the president? Would he shake my hand? Which, of course, didn't happen. But we were ready for this thing to happen. We had been practicing extensively for weeks because it just doesn't happen overnight. So we had a dummy command module, which they'd drop in the ocean, and then they'd wake us up at 2 in the morning and say, go find it. Things of that nature. So we were ready, fully prepared. A lot of us were amused at the apprehension about moon bugs. But
well, let me ask now, what was your role on the ship?
I worked in the radar area. I was a radarman 3rd class. My job on the NASA recovery was the primary radio operator. So essentially, they would give me a piece of paper and I would read it. And so I had the distinct privilege of being the person heard around the world, although nobody knows that, saying, Houston, Hawaii, this is Hornet, we have Apollo on board.
How does that make you feel that you're etched in history? Because usually on a ship, when you make announcements, it stays within the ship. Did you know it was going to be heard around the world at the time, or did they tell you later?
They told me later that had been broadcast around the world. And out of the 1 billion or so people who were listening, only one person actually said she recognized my voice.
Did the crew members tease you, or did you get like a plaque or a cake? Or?
No, there was no recognition of that sort. We were all just part of the team. There were about 40 or so enlisted men, and I think 30 officers, something in that area, who were directly involved in some way. We all had a job.
Hey, you're watching NASA TV, on the air and online every day, on this planet and beyond.
Seeking ideas for landing systems to return humans to the moon, showcasing our aeronautics research efforts, and the science connection to Apollo 11's splashdown. A few of the stories to tell you about this week at NASA. We're looking for ideas from American companies on a human landing system for our Artemis program, which aims to put the first woman and next man on the moon by 2024. Although internal studies point to a 3-stage landing system to safely transport astronauts between the moon and our lunar gateway, we're interested in alternative approaches that can accomplish the same long-term goals of global lunar access and reusability. Our Artemis missions will use what we learn on the moon to prepare for human missions to Mars. We joined the Experimental Aircraft Association's Air Venture Oshkosh 2019 event with forums and exhibits showcasing the latest technologies in aeronautics research. History was also on display with an overview of the space race during Project Apollo. The event also included updates on a wide range of current and future NASA science and space exploration programs. Our 50th anniversary celebration of Apollo 11 continued this week with a special edition of NASA Science Live on July 23rd, taking viewers on board the USS Hornet aircraft carrier that recovered the Apollo 11 capsule after splashdown. Splashdown marked the conclusion of the cruise mission, but it was just the beginning for the science brought back from the moon. This episode focused on what we learned from the Apollo missions, what we're still uncovering today, and what we hope to discover with future Artemis missions to the moon.
It's our honor to have you on board, and we just hope that we're keeping the innovative spirit alive that you all sparked.
On July 24th, the date Apollo 11 splashed down 50 years ago, Michael Collins, the mission's command module pilot, spoke to the crew aboard the International Space Station from our Johnson Space Center in Houston.
Those Apollo people who are still around, we salute you, and we didn't realize we'd spawned an operation of such complexity when we were doing it a few years back, but bless you and have a good one.
The space station is a multinational research lab and technology test bed where we're learning human health and other research vital to our exploration future.
And liftoff.
On July 25th, our commercial partner SpaceX launched its Dragon cargo spacecraft to the International Space Station aboard a Falcon 9 rocket from Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida. The Dragon is delivering supplies, equipment, and science investigations to the orbital outpost as part of the company's 18th resupply mission for NASA. Chris Kraft, NASA's first flight director, passed away on July 22nd. Kraft created the concept of NASA's mission control and led the human spaceflight program from Project Mercury through Apollo 12. After becoming director of our Johnson Space Center, he continued playing a vital role in the success of the final Apollo missions through the first flights of the space shuttle. His concept of mission operations is still in daily use by the International Space Station Mission Control Team. Chris Kraft was 95 years old. That's what's up this week at NASA. For more on these and other stories, follow us on the web at nasa.gov/twan.
Station, this is Houston. Are you ready for the event?
Houston Station, I am ready for the event.
Houston Station, I am ready for the event.
World Scout Jamboree, this is Mission Control Houston. Please call station for a voice check. Please call station for a voice check.
Hello, Drew. How do you hear us?
I've got you loud and clear.
We're loud and clear also, Drew. Welcome to the Summit Bechtel Reserve here in West Virginia. There are over 40,000 scouts here from more than 140 different countries. This event promotes peace and mutual understanding, develops our youth with life skills and leadership, and offers them a once-in-a-lifetime adventure. So we've got a whole room full of excited scouts, and we're going to start with our questions.
Hi, my name is Supreet. I'm from India. Here's my question. What is the next major goal we should be chasing? When and how do you think we'll achieve it?
Well, first of all, I wanted to just welcome you all on board the International Space Station. It is my honor to be joining you there at Bechtel Summit Reserve for the World Scout Jamboree. And I believe that the question was about where should we be headed next? What's next? And, you know, the International Space Station is a small part in a big grand plan for us to put humans on Mars in the several decades from now. And our immediate goal here in the next couple of years will be to return humans back to the surface of the moon by 2024. The International Space Station's been in orbit now for 2 decades, with humans on board, over 2 decades. And I'm just a part of that, and I was able to join the crew here on the International Space Station just a couple of days ago. I just got here this past weekend, so I'm a new resident and new crew member on board the International Space Station.
Hi, I'm Ollie and I'm from the United Kingdom, and this is my question. Has your understanding of the universe or Earth changed since going into space?
Well, I'd say it has. You know, now that I've spent a couple days up here, I've been able to spend a fair amount of time looking out the window, looking down at the Earth. Even when I was in the capsule and the Soyuz vehicle on my way up here, I was able to look out of the window and get a perspective of just how thin our atmosphere is and how huge our planet seems. But then when you look and see the vastness of space, you see that we are just a small, relatively insignificant part of the entire universe, and that we have this beautiful vantage point on the International Space Station that we like to share with everybody back there on Earth.
Okay, my name is Jacob. I'm coming from Denmark. Where can you go in space, and what are the limitations?
Our limitations, and right now, you know, if you look at what we've accomplished in our space program, we just recently have celebrated, just this past weekend, the landing, the Apollo 11 moon landing 50 years ago. So we've put humans on the surface of the moon, and we've put humans now continuously in low Earth orbit for the last 20 years. And so far, right now, those are our accomplishments in space, and those are significant. But we want to do more. We want to go further. We want to get out there and explore our solar system and universe to an even greater degree. And so there are a number of limitations that are going to present challenges as we head towards Mars, and some of those are medical and physiologic. What can the human body withstand in terms of radiation and spending long periods of time in microgravity? And those are things that we can study here on the International Space Station to help us enable those.
Hi, my name is Nikolai Mohammed. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and my question is, what activities do you do to pass time? And is it true you're going to keep getting scouting magazines while in space?
Well, we do have the opportunities for entertainment up here because, you know, most of us are up here for several months. I'll be up here for close to 8 or 9 months on board the International Space Station. So having things to read and watch and pass the time are important. There are movies we can watch television shows. They can be uplinked to us. We can also get magazines. Obviously, we can't get mail, so we don't get them in print, and we can get magazines in electronic format, and so we can still keep up on current events either by watching television or receiving periodicals. And to answer your question, I will be keeping up with scouting news.
Hi, my name is Jasmijn from the Netherlands, and my question is, what do you and NASA hope to achieve from this mission?
Well, there are a number of things that are unique about this period of time while we're on board. We do believe that we will see the first U.S. vehicles launched from the U.S. Return to the International Space Station after a number of years since the space shuttle retired. And that's important because the more different methods that we have for getting astronauts onto the International Space Station, it's better for the program all around. For the last couple of years, we've been launching American and international partner astronauts on Soyuz, the Russian space vehicle, an extremely reliable, great vehicle. But by having U.S. vehicles launch from Florida, again, we'll have other means of getting astronauts to the International Space Station. We also have a lot of spacewalks planned, a lot of repairs and things to do the exterior of the space station, so we have a number of those. And then, of course, we have all kinds of new science coming on board every time we have a visiting vehicle come up, bringing more science experiments, and we have those ongoing right now. Right now, my crewmates around me are all conducting scientific experiments in different modules. And the more science that we do, the more we can start to solve those problems I mentioned that are the challenges that are going to enable us to go further into the universe. past the moon, and on to Mars.
Hi, my name's Alvin, and I'm from Ethiopia. Here's my question. What are some of the research experiments on the International Space Station, and how are they different from research on Earth?
That's a great question. We have lots of different types of scientific experiments going on the International Space Station. They are in the realm of biology and medical science, physical sciences, earth and space sciences. We do technology demonstrations, and we do a lot of educational outreach as well. Some of those require astronaut interaction, and some of them are external payloads or experiments that are instruments that are mounted to the exterior of the space station. But one of the greatest things that the International Space Station allows us to do is to conduct science without that variable of microgravity. Anytime we do an experiment, we want to control all the variables we can, but if we can eliminate gravity as one of them, that allows us to study scientific questions in a purer form by eliminating gravity from as a factor and seeing what how the results would be different.
Hello, my name is Lovisa and I am from Sweden. And my question is, what are some of your daily tasks on the space station?
Well, our day has every moment scheduled out for it. It starts with waking up and doing personal hygiene like you would expect just at home. We have to brush our teeth. We have to clean our bodies, use the bathroom, eat breakfast. Then we get right to our day, performing maintenance tasks, performing our scientific experiments, as I was describing earlier. We have breaks, though, to take lunch. We have eat meals. The day is full. The day is very full. And then at the end of the day, we have opportunity to rest. We can call home, and we can, if we feel like watching a television show, just interacting with our crewmates. It fills the entire day out quite a bit. So it's a busy time.
Hey, I'm Annabelle from Australia, and do you think scouting will give us an advantage in becoming some of the next people to make history in space?
Well, I think the scouting movement all over the world is important because it teaches you what I believe is one of the most valuable things you can take in life, which is a sense of service to something bigger than yourselves, and making you a better citizen of the planet. And that is a principle of scouting around the world, which is why it's so important that you all are gathered there to celebrate this common bond that you have.
Hi, I'm Megan from South Africa, and my question is, can you tell us how you went from being an army doctor to an astronaut?
Well, I would say that, again, I referenced service just a moment ago, and service to my service started out as service to my country in the military, and service to my patients as a physician, specifically a physician to the members of the armed forces. And I view my time as an astronaut as a continuation of that service. And so in many ways, and that is the most direct way that I make that connection. But, you know, it is the medical background is a highly useful skill as an astronaut. A number of the experiments that we conduct on board the International Space Station are medical or biological in nature, and I will be able to apply that background quite a bit. And, of course, it's nice in the event of a medical emergency if one of the astronauts has some medical skills, but we have more than enough capability up here that we don't require a doctor at all times.
Hello, I'm Gabriel from Brazil, and my question is, as an assistant scoutmaster, are you still planning to join troop meetings from space?
So I should add that my service in scouting has been primarily as an adult leader, as an assistant scoutmaster. I was a Cub Scout as a young child, but I never progressed all the way to as a Boy Scout. And now I've spent a number of years as an assistant scoutmaster. My oldest of my 4 children, my son, is an Eagle Scout, recently pinned just before I left to come to my launch a couple of weeks ago, and he remains involved in scouting. And then one of my 3 daughters is also getting ready to join scouting, and we're going to work through that when I get back from my mission, because I want to get her involved too, because it's been such a positive experience so far for my son, and I would like all my daughters to have that opportunity as well. And I do plan on staying connected with my scout troop back home, Troop 452 in Friendswood, Texas.
Hello, my name is Monica and I'm from Slovakia. And my question is, we all know astronauts spend tons of time training, but has anything happened that you weren't prepared for? If so, how did you handle it?
Well, I think I would start by answering that question by saying the training that we receive is so excellent, and thus far in my mission, I feel like I've been fully trained for everything that I have encountered. However, we are also trained to be very flexible and be able to be good problem solvers, so that when something does arise that we don't expect, and inevitably in my time on board the International Space Station, there'll be things that we didn't expect to occur, but we know how to improvise, we know how to work well as a team, and we know how to solve problems, complex problems, and we have an enormous team on the ground to help us, so we always have somebody that we can call and ask for help.
Hello, my name is Eve. I'm from Finland, and here's my question. Is there Wi-Fi in space? How do you communicate with your family and friends?
I didn't hear the entire question, but I think what you were asking was how I'll stay connected with family and friends on the ground, and that's a very important part of the psychological health of an astronaut while we're on board the International Space Station for such a long time. And, you know, believe it or not, it's a lot of the things that you would use to stay connected if you were on a long trip for a long period of time. We have email capability. I have the ability to use a special phone to call, bounces off of satellites, of course, but I'm able to call home. We even have access to the internet, so there are certain things that are available where we could connect to social media. And then on every couple of weeks or so, we can have a video teleconference with our families as well. So it helps to be able to see their faces and just stay connected that way. But staying connected with your family is really important for our time, considering how long it is and life goes on. I will be gone for almost an entire school year for my children's upcoming school year, and I want to stay involved, and having all these different ways to do that will help me stay connected with them.
Hi, my name is Aaron. I'm from Aruba. What's the coolest thing you've seen in space?
I didn't hear your question entirely. If you wouldn't mind asking that one more time.
What's the coolest thing you've seen in space?
Drew, what is the coolest thing that you've seen in space?
Copy. The coolest thing I've seen in space. Well, I don't know. I feel like I should show you guys a couple cool things. The first time I saw my friends on their side and doing backflips, I thought that was pretty cool, and I'm hoping that you guys do too.
Hello, my name is Jack. I'm from the United States, and my question is, what kind of dangers can happen during a spacewalk, and how do you deal with something like that?
Dangers during spacewalks. Yeah, spacewalks are dangerous. They're inherently very dangerous because we're basically going out in a small spaceship outside of the International Space Station in a small pressurized suit. And certainly there are a lot of components on that can fail. And but you know, we use some very hardy equipment, but we need the capability to provide oxygen and pressurization to the suit at all times, scrub carbon dioxide, and if any of those elements were to fail, that would be a problem. But just sort of like I alluded to before, we have a big team on the ground that's getting information about the suit constantly, and we're able to communicate with them, and we have checklists that we work through, and so if we see a failure, the suit gives us an alarm, and we work through the checklist, and the ground helps us work through it, and we get safely back inside the airlock if it requires us to.
Hi, my name is Johanka and I'm from the Czech Republic. Is the water you drink recycled or does it come from water supplies?
Good question. We do both. We try to recover water. We condense the moisture in the air. We actually even recycle our urine and wastewater that is collected, and we turn it back into drinking water. But we also, when we have vehicles come up, we do have water supply brought to us as well, because we're not able to reclaim it all 100%, but much of it we are. So we get it by both methods.
So Drew, this is Greg here. We'd like to thank you and NASA for helping us to expand the reach of this global event here at the World Scout Jamboree by connecting the ISS to these youth on our planet. So thank you so much.
And Greg, thank you. It's been my pleasure. I just wanted to show off our flag here that was sent up. My honor to do so.
Station, this is Houston ACR. That concludes the event.
Thank you to all participants from World Scout Jamboree. Station, we are now resuming operational audio communications.
Hey, you're watching NASA TV, on the air and online every day, on this planet and beyond.
Station, this is Houston. Are you ready for the event?
Houston, we are ready for the event.
BBC World News, this is Mission Control Houston. Please call station for a voice check.
Station, this is Laura Trevelyan with BBC World News. How do you hear me?
We hear you loud and clear. Welcome to the International Space Station.
Fantastic. Christina and Nick, this is Laura Trevelyan. If you're all set, we'll begin the interview.
We're ready, Laura.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us from the International Space Station, Christina and Nick. Nick, what is the view like from up there today?
It's breathtaking every time you look out the window. We're actually in a night pass right now, getting ready to fly over just the western part of Australia. And this is a favorite place that we like to be because you can look out the window and see the southern lights. This green glow that dances around on the horizon, it's just, it takes your breath away.
Christina, you plan on being in space for 328 days. How is it going so far?
Well, I'm about 4 months into my mission, about 1/3 of the way through, and I'm just excited that I get to be here for another 7. It's been a wonderful mission so far, and I really just take it one day at a time. You know, I like to think that it's not how many days I'm up here or the number of days, but it's what I do with each and every day, and that kind of reminds me to bring my best to each day that I'm here. The people that inspired me, I draw on their inspiration and their example, those that came before me, and thinking about what they did and the things that they went through to pave the way for me to be where I am today. And that reminds me that, again, I need to bring my best every day. I have to say my biggest hope for the record is that it's actually exceeded as soon as possible, because that'll mean that we're continuing to push the boundaries and continuing to explore new realms of what humans can do in space.
And Christina, it's almost 50 years since the first moon landing. There's another one planned by NASA. Could you be the first female astronaut on the moon?
Yes.
Well, Laura, it's a privilege to even have that question posed. I don't necessarily think about it from that point of view, but something I do think about is that I'll be privileged to know the person that is chosen for that, because coming out of our current astronaut corps, there are a number of very capable, awesome, impressive, and inspiring people to choose from for that privilege and for that honor. I think that whoever it is will be ready, will be excited to represent our country and indeed the entire Earth on that endeavor. We all look to our heroes from the Apollo program when we think about moving forward, and we all train to be ready for anything. So it is exciting that it will be someone that we know and that we've trained with, and that we can say is definitely up for the task.
And Nick, did it inspire you to become an astronaut, that first moon landing 50 years ago?
Absolutely. It's one of those things where the accomplishment shows you what is possible when you put your mind to something very challenging. And looking back, you know, being up here today, we're here because of the efforts of so many people. The long history, it's a privilege to be associated with that long history of space exploration and all the advancements that they've been able to make. But we're also here today because of the gigantic team that it takes in order to support a mission like this. It's not just the two of us here, it's the two of us here, and it's the thousands spread around the globe in different mission control centers. And I think that's really what inspired me the most to get involved with space exploration, is that sense of team. It's a team going out and trying to accomplish seemingly impossible things.
Now, speaking of teamwork, are there any tricks that you two have been working on up there in that zero gravity environment? I see the microphone floating around. Perhaps you can show us what you can do.
We did recently come up with a little demonstration of microgravity that we'd be glad to show you right now if you'd like.
We'd love that.
We like to call that our double flip maneuver. It doesn't always go perfectly, but it's something that we've come up with, the two of us.
That was excellent. Now, is there anything else you can do?
So one of the things we like to do is have a little bit of fun with each other. It's tough to get motion sick up here, but we try. So Laura, you can still spin your gyros a little bit, but it takes a little work.
Well, it certainly beats going to the gym. Now, Nick and Christina, back down here on Earth, the victorious U.S. women's soccer team is being celebrated in Manhattan with a ticker tape parade. Do you two have a message for the team?
Yes, we are very excited to hear that. We did watch the game on the big screen last Sunday, and I heard about the ticker tape parade, and I couldn't be more happy for the team. I think they demonstrated awesome tenacity, hard work, drive, grit, and those are all also the things that are embraced by the human spaceflight program and by NASA in terms of us pushing farther, pushing harder, and making sure that we bring our best every single day, just like they brought to every single match. And it was an honor to watch them, and we really enjoyed following along and even being inspired by their example.
And what are your hopes for the next 50 years of space exploration, Nick and Christina?
Yeah, so I think my hope is fairly simple. It's that we continue to push the boundaries of what we know and what we think are possible. You know, that is to take us back to the moon and to go in a sustainable way, and then to take what we learn there and to push further and go to Mars. And it's exciting to think about all the things that could be. And I know that with the global team that we've assembled as part of the International Space Station program and the lessons we've learned, that's going to take us into the future and ensure our success.
Nick Hague and Christina Cook, thank you so much for joining us from the International Space Station.
And thank you for all of your questions. It was great to be with you today.
Station, this is Houston ACR. That concludes the BBC World News portion of the event. Please stand by for a voice check from WARL.
Thank you. ISB is in. That's red, yeah. International Space Station, this is Catherine. This is Catherine Brown. Can you guys hear me?
Catherine, we hear you loud and clear. Welcome to the International Space Station.
Great, thank you. Okay, are we set? Christina, are you there?
And Catherine, Nick and I are both with you. Great to be with you today.
Okay.
Welcome on board.
Okay. All right, great. Hey, it is great to talk to you. So first question, it's 10:55 here in Raleigh. What time is it there? What kind of time do you guys keep?
Yep, we are at about 2:55 in the afternoon, so we are about 4 hours later than Eastern Standard Time, about 5 hours later than our home base where we have mission control in Houston. So it's not too bad, keeping in touch with friends and family from home.
Awesome. Well, everyone, Christina, specifically for you, everyone in North Carolina is so proud to have you representing North Carolina, especially NC State and the North Carolina School of Science and Math. How did those specific schools prepare you for what you're doing now?
Yep, I do call myself a proud graduate of both of those schools, and I also attended White Oak High School in Jacksonville, North Carolina. And I think all of the schools that I went to really did a great job of preparing me for what I'm experiencing here today and for my career before I became an astronaut as well. Specifically at North Carolina State University, I had so many options of different things I could study beyond electrical engineering and physics, which is what I majored in, including extracurriculars. That's where I got my start in rock climbing and other types of clubs, lots of hands-on engineering projects and things like that. And then also a lot of group work, teamwork, and allowed me to sort of develop those skills that aren't necessarily just technical, but that allow you to take any technical skills that you have and make sure they get applied and make sure that you have those opportunities where you can really put that to work. The North Carolina School of Science and Math was instrumental for me as well because it was a place, their motto is accepting the greater challenge. And I think that's what we do every day here in the Human Space Flight Program. When I left my small town of Jacksonville, North Carolina and moved to Durham to attend that school, my entire world was opened, and I realized that there's a lot of really interesting things going on in these technical fields that I hadn't really been exposed to before. So it was a very eye-opening time, a time of a lot of change and a lot of growth. And I really credit the great teachers that I had there, the great professors that I had at North Carolina State University.
Oh, I bet. Wow, that's incredible. And I'm sure your eyes have been opened over the past, I don't know, 10, 15 years, even more. Do you still have the Wolfpack symbol? Do you make that up there for your buddies?
I do have a couple little mementos from my time at North Carolina State University. I'm looking forward to bringing them out in a future event when I have with them. So I'd like to do an outreach event with my former college, and I'm looking forward to connecting with some students there, some other North Carolinians that have, you know, the twinkle of their dreams in their eye, and just give them a little bit of the perspective that I've had in coming from being in their shoes and having the great opportunity and honor of working on board the International Space Station. I also told Nick to get his Wolfpack colors out for the day, so knowing we'd be talking to you guys.
I love it. I love it. All the fans here are going to be loving it as well. We love the red and black. Do you do the symbols with your hands, the Wolfpack?
Pack pride.
You've just become the most popular person in Raleigh. Christina, and this is for Nick as well, I know that both of you have said that your training really prepared you for the rigors of space. What's been the biggest surprise so far?
Yeah, so one of the biggest surprises and the things that you really can't prepare for is how your body is going to adapt to space. A lot of that's physical adaptation. The first couple weeks you're up here, your inner ear is trying to figure out why it can't determine which way is down, and your fluids in your body rush to your head because your heart's pushing too hard. You lose weight. So that's the initial. Then, you know, the physical stuff kind of, you adapt slowly over a month or so. And then what I realized is that just recently, you know, after being up here for almost 4 months, mentally I have adjusted in terms of the way that I can map myself around the space station and feel natural while I'm floating. That floating is now the way my mind expects things to be. And so it is kind of forgotten about gravity, and it makes it much easier to get around here. And so all those adaptations you can't practice on the ground, and so that's really the surprise.
That's incredible. Christina, I know you've tweeted out...
One of the things that surprised me the most...
Oh, go ahead.
You know what? I was actually going to play right into what you were about to bring up, pictures of North Carolina and my home state, because one of the things that has surprised me the most is how amazing it is and how breathtaking it is to look down and see the place on Earth where you grew up, and to know that from that place you used to look up to the stars for inspiration, and realizing that now I look down and I see the same inspiration in North Carolina's oceans and the beautiful mountains and the beautiful Outer Banks, and seeing the Raleigh-Durham area and actually being able to pick out the Beltway and places that are familiar to me. And so I have shared those images that have been so impactful to me and were such a surprise to me with hopefully folks in North Carolina to make that connection back with my hometown.
They have been incredible, and we have loved seeing all those pictures. Can you comprehend what it is that you're doing there in terms of the history that you're making and how people look up to you now the way that you used to look up to people who were in your position?
You know, we do reflect on that very thing a lot. I think that just being here, there's, you know, our day-to-day work, but then there's a lot of time to reflect just on that, our position in history, how much we owe to those that paved the way for us to be here today, and how we can pay them back and pay it forward by doing our best every day and by turning that inspiration around and hopefully being a role model for those that are thinking about what they want to do and what their dreams are. You know, interestingly, though, my hometown was small and not necessarily had a lot of examples of people in technical fields, I still had that drive. And I think the most incredible thing about the teachers I encountered, my coaches, and all the role models I had there around me was no one discouraged my dreams, even though it wasn't something that was necessarily, you know, in close proximity to where I was at. And I think knowing that we can hopefully fill that role for others is just an incredible honor.
It has been an honor talking with you guys, and we appreciate you taking a little time. We have about 20 seconds left. Any tricks you can show us, like flips or anti-gravity things?
we have a little flip trick that we can show you guys that we've tried to perfect.
Wow.
And Catherine, it's been our pleasure to be with you today. Thank you for all your great questions.
Chatting with you. All right, have fun, stay safe, and we look forward to continue following your journey and speaking with you when you get home. Thanks so much, Christina, and Nick as well. Thanks so much, Christina, and Nick.
Thank you. We look forward to being back on Earth, and I look forward to being back in North Carolina one day soon.
Station, this is Houston ACR. That concludes the event. Thank you.
Thank you to all participants from BBC World News and WRAL station. We are now resuming operational audio communications.
Hey, you're watching NASA TV, on the air and online every day, on this planet and beyond.
SpaceX's Dragon on its 18th commercial resupply mission to the International Space Station. That's your live look right now. We are live from the International Space Station Flight Control Room in Houston, Texas at Johnson Space Center. After an almost 2-day journey, Dragon has arrived to the space station, which is now flying about 262 statute miles over the Atlantic Ocean. Teams of flight controllers here are monitoring all of the systems aboard the International Space Station, and currently they're led by Flight Director TJ Creamer. And the Capcom for this morning, or the capsule communicator, is Travis Fitzgerald. He's relaying the communications from this room to the astronauts aboard the International Space Station. Dragon, which you can see here, is attached via the Canadarm2, which is the station's robotic arm, and currently controlling the Canadarm2 are robotics controllers here on the ground in mission control. They are repositioning the Dragon after it arrived earlier today and was grappled by NASA's Nick Hague, and they'll begin to bring that up closer to the station's Harmony module before berthing it to the module for about a month-long stay. Dragon arrives today with over 5,000 pounds of supplies, equipment, experiments, and more. And good to note is this Dragon spacecraft itself has made 3 trips. This is its 3rd trip to the International Space Station. That's a first for SpaceX, who prioritizes reusability for their capsules as well as their boosters. We currently have 6 humans living aboard the International Space Station. That's NASA's Christina Cook, Alexei Ovchinin, and Nick Hague, who all arrived in March. The other 3 crew members, Luca Parmitano, Alexander Skvortsov, and Andrew Morgan, actually just arrived 1 week ago today. That's July 20th, on the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing and the first steps on another world. Earlier today, teams here on the ground used the cameras aboard the International Space Station to take a look at the common berthing mechanism on the station side. That's what Dragon will be berthing with later, and on the vehicle itself. That's to make sure that there are no foreign object debris in the way and ensure a smooth berthing process. As we mentioned, all of the movement from the Canadarm2 is being commanded from ground control teams. They are sending commands from Mission Control Houston to the station's robotic arm, moving that in very small increments as they perform alignment checks along the way. while the astronauts commanded the capture of Dragon earlier today, most of that work is now being done by the team on the ground. And the astronauts are taking care of other tasks on board, including exercising. However, as we begin to see Dragon get closer to the space station, they'll be put in an exercise hold. And that means no exercise is allowed on the station to avoid any vibrations in the Canadarm2 and keep the vehicle aligned. Dragon's journey began on Thursday, July 25th, as it lifted off from Space Launch Complex 40 at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. At the time, the space station was 254 statute miles over Oman, near the Arabian Sea, and this was a second launch attempt for SpaceX, as the day before it had been canceled due to weather.
Up to the International Space Station.
Dragon was launched aboard the Falcon 9 rocket, and that you can see here. And this is actually the second time that rocket has been used. The booster was previously used in the launch of SpaceX's 17th commercial resupply mission. And as we mentioned, the Dragon capsule itself is now seeing its third visit to the space station. After the solar arrays unfurled about 12 minutes after launch on July 25th, it began its journey to the space station, firing its thrusters to catch up with the orbiting laboratory, and it arrived to the location where we saw it earlier this morning. After its launch on July 25th, Dragon arrived at the space station early this morning, and we started our joint operations between SpaceX and NASA as it reached the approach ellipsoid. That's the 1 kilometer line around the space station. It's an invisible border, but that is when those joint operations begin, and it experienced its first hold point at 250 meters. Those hold points are opportunities for the teams on the ground and also astronauts aboard the space station to prepare for Dragon's entry past the 200-meter keep-out sphere. Once Dragon moved up to its 30-meter hold point, teams continued to run checks before giving it the go to approach the 10 to 12-meter distance from the space station. And that's when NASA astronaut Nick Hague used the Canadarm2 to reach out and grapple the spacecraft. He was backed up by NASA's Christina Cook. And you've got a live replay of the capture of Dragon right there. You can see Canadarm2 moving very slowly. And that capture occurred at 8:11 a.m. Central Time over southern Chile. That was a little bit earlier than we were expecting this morning, so things continue to move along smoothly. And Dragon is now outside of the station's Harmony module, where it will be berthed later. Canadarm2 is now in motion, moving Dragon into position. And as I mentioned, those are small and deliberate movements to make sure it remains aligned with the common berthing mechanism aboard the International Space Station. If you look closely under the X on SpaceX on the capsule, you can see a small Apollo logo, kind of hard to make out with this view, but that's a tribute to the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing, which we've been celebrating. Canadarm is now in a hold, and if you're wondering what you're seeing below, the space station is flying about 259 statute miles over Algeria. Crews aboard the International Space Station see about 16 sunrises and sunsets a day as it moves at about 17,500 miles an hour. We're continuing to take your Ask NASA questions, so if you're watching and on Twitter, you can use that hashtag and let us know what you're wondering. This one from Pascal wanting to know why the Canadarm is needed to dock Dragon to the ISS. There's actually a difference between docking and berthing, which is what we're watching this morning. Soyuz and Progress spacecraft have an active docking mechanism and on the spacecraft and the station side, so that's